Hello and welcome back to On Course, our regular look at the sailing world. Down here in Auckland it was all going well. The weather was beautiful, the racing was fascinating. I got out to see a bit of what the Hauraki Gulf looks like off the racecourse with my friends Steve and Debbie aboard their boat. And I even got into the air to think about how AC-75s go around corners and see what the sea breeze looked like from above. But then a new COVID outbreak put the summer on pause. The government put the city and indeed the country on lockdown. The Prada Cup was on hold. We were 2 days into the final. The Italian supporters have been feeling strong, their British counterparts anxious. Could Ineos pull off another comeback? In this episode we take a look at how we got to this point. Plus I find out what it's like to trim an AC-75 rig with a box of buttons. We also have more from our growing band of supporters in Docktalk. Thanks guys. But first, in the Northern Hemisphere, the world's toughest offshore solo race delivered an extraordinary finish. Steve Ansell looks back at how the Vendée Globe was won.
Tail-end Charlie, Ari Huesela aboard Stark, had finally made it to the infamous Cape Horn.
We still have 25-26 knots of wind and gusting up to 32 knots and speeds with the mainsail on 3 reefs only. We are doing it quite nice and slowly and controlled way, around 12 knots. Hopefully I see at least the lighthouse light there, and I try to contact the lighthouse keeper with the VHF to chat with him to change some words. It's a so extraordinary thing for the sailor to be able to pass Cape Horn, and especially during Vendée Globe around the world race.
Nice to see a Finnish ensign flying there, Ari. He and female skipper Alexia Barrier were chasing the international pack off the coast of Brazil, as early favourite Jeremy Bayu on Chiral made it to the equator, but he's run out of track to get near the top 10. Clarice Kramer on Bank Populaire 10 led the female skipper contingent in 12th overall. At the front, it was a nail-biting tactical battle. Redress time awarded from the Escoffier Rescue playing wildcards. Some went east, others north in search of the promise of stronger winds. A gamble for sure. Apivia had the shortest distance to go, heading towards the Bay of Biscay.
So I will be diving at some point today, and finally being able to use foil and get some speed, decent speed on port. The good news today is now for the remaining time on the race I've got more time on port side and on port tack than starboard tack, so that's the good news. I should be able to sail at a higher pace.
Now, it wasn't just the weather and seas to keep an eye and ear out for, as Boris explained.
As if we didn't have enough stress, and this adds to the stress. Speaking with a guy and half an hour of checking, convincing him, get out of my way, I'm a sailboat. I have right of way.
After a reduced sails option from damage at the Horn, one-time leader Bessavant went north, through the Azores, searching for stronger conditions for his remaining sail wardrobe.
Je tenais à vous rassurer, je ne suis pas parti ramasser des hortensias sur cette jolie île fleurie de Horta, des Açores, qui se trouve à ma droite, pas très loin. Mais je tente une option nord pour aller chercher des fronts et des vents plus forts. Dans les 5 premières places, ça va se jouer à quelques heures près tout ça. Donc voilà, donc autant tenter des choses. C'est maintenant qu'il faut tenter des coups pour n'avoir rien à regretter sur la ligne d'arrivée des sables.
It was Charlie Town that swept up from the southwest on his favoured port tack to arrive at the finish line after 80 days, 6 hours, 15 minutes and 47 seconds. He had nursed Apivia's damaged port foil for more than halfway around the course and purposely went south of the rum line to enable him to finish on a port tack, using his undamaged starboard foil for best speed. But although line honours for his first Vendée Globe was a tremendous achievement, those redressed timings for the two rivals behind him denied him the main prize as yet, with the clock ticking.
Heureux d'avoir franchi la ligne en tête de ce Vendée Globe 2020-2021. Voilà, c'était une sacrée course, une sacrée aventure. Il y a eu plein de rebondissements, j'ai eu des hauts, des bas, eu pas mal de bricolage aussi. Mais non, c'est une super expérience, quoi.
Coming in from the north was St Malo sailor Louis Berton, who almost gave up in the middle of the Southern Ocean with a solo pit stop and made up the 900-mile deficit to take second at the line. Burton's arrival some 4 hours after Dallin credited him with a duration of 80 days, 10 hours, 25 minutes and 12 seconds. Burton has sailed 8 transatlantics and 2 round the world solo, including the last Vendée Globe. Everyone praised that 7th position in the race on an old Imoca, one of the heaviest of the fleet. This time it was in the previous winning boat, but he too had to watch the clock.
Alors écoute, y a une grande joie évidemment de retrouver les proches, de savoir d'où on revient, et je sais qu'il y a un truc qui m'a toujours accroché au moment où j'allais abandonner, c'était de penser à mes 2 petits loups qui sont tout jeunes et qui avaient absolument pas envie que j'abandonne, parce que je pense qu'ils avaient peur que ce soit la honte à l'école, tu vois.
Meanwhile, in third place, less than 90 miles from the finish in the South Bay of Biscay, disaster struck the German sailor who carried a 6-hour redress through his involvement with the Escoffier rescue. Boris Herrmann could theoretically still win.
About half an hour ago I hit a fishing vessel, a huge fish trawler. I was sleeping and I woke up and I was here in the cockpit looking up a huge wall with a fish trawler, and my starboard side sails were in his side. My Janaker was stuck on his cranes and sinks on the side, and I hear sail ripping, and I was bouncing a few times with the outrigger into the fishing vessel, and then luckily I could slip past and go, but that was a real shock moment. And then I investigated all the first most important things, so there was no water coming in. The foil is damaged, but not the foil case. The bowsprit is broken off, so I'm really gutted, and I'm sorry for everyone who supports us that this happened. It's certainly the worst nightmare that happened to me so far, and what really intrigues me is, why did it happen? I had all my alarms on, and I had many ships this afternoon where the radar alarm would perfectly alert me, the AIS alarm would perfectly alert me, Oscar was on as well. I had everything on, and I have on purpose checked on every ship if the alarm works well, and so observing on the radar how the echo is, and that was all working perfectly with all the past ships I crossed. And yeah, okay, take another deep breath and try to solve this problem with the shroud and look forward to the finish. It's quite heartbreaking, but we will make it.
Past the Azores with the Southern Ocean and Cape Horn leader Yannick Bestelant. On the front of the Atlantic Depression, speeding in towards that ticking clock, carrying a massive 10 hours and 15 minutes redress wildcard, he was unaware of Boris's words and crossed the line in the middle of the night to take third place on the water. But with his redress, enough for the overall winner's trophy by some 2.5 hours.
Il y a tellement de choses difficiles dans un Vendée Globe. Le Vendée Globe, c'est dur, on croit avoir pensé à tout imaginer, et on doit aller chercher des ressources bien profondes en soi. Et ce qui est dur, c'est le stress avec ces bateaux qui sont violents, qui sont stressants, bruyants. Vivre en permanence sur le qui-vive, à l'écoute du bateau, dans des conditions difficiles. L'humidité, le froid, la solitude parfois aussi. Il y a plein de choses qui sont difficiles à rencontrer. J'ai l'impression de vivre un rêve, d'halluciner quoi. Là, c'est bizarre, hein, on passe de la solitude totale à ça quoi. À cette fête, ces lumières, les gens qui sont là malgré le contexte compliqué. Ouais, c'est un bonheur, je réalise pas encore ce qui se passe, je suis encore toujours dans ma course alors que c'est terminé, mais ouais, c'est un rêve d'enfant qui se réalise.
Thomas Riant on Linked Out, always in the top 3, and another nursing foil damage, crossed the line less than 90 minutes after Yannick.
J'espère revenir pour revivre une vraie arrivée de Vendée Globe et un vrai départ, quoi. Parce que c'est une situation qui est compliquée. Là, on débarque un peu de 3 mois de mer et on sait bien qu'à terre c'est compliqué et que ce virus il nous vole beaucoup de choses. C'est pas la fête populaire qu'on peut connaître avec un Vendée Globe. Il y a pas le public qui devrait y avoir. Et voilà, c'est dommage parce que. Mais bon, en même temps, j'espère qu'on a pu donner un petit peu de petite bouffée d'air et un peu d'air aux gens avec cette course.
Next morning, and Boris Herman limped in with his collision damage plain for all to see. Right up to the 80th day, he was in with a good chance of victory, but cruelly snatched away by the fishing boat incident. A bittersweet arrival for the German who had endeared himself throughout the race, and always willing to give a cheery chat and virtual tour of the boat for the media. His redress moves him up to 4th, ahead of Riant. Another new Vendée Globe star crossed the line, taking 6th, less than an hour after Boris. Apparently, Captain Hook made a surprise stowaway appearance on board Groupe Apicil. This was the first of the non-foiling rockers, with first-timer Damien Seguin. The double Paralympic gold medalist literally is single-handed, having been born without his left hand. A true testament to his determination and skills on his first solo round the world race, in second position more than once. Italian sailor Giancarlo Bedotti on Prismian Crew took a well-deserved 7th place 44 minutes after Seguin, arriving just after midday, still within the leading group's 80th day at sea. The wily Jean Le Cam arrives 24 hours after Dallin. Yes, we can cross the line in atrocious weather, but nevertheless to a hero's welcome, after his brilliant display of pure seamanship and typical nonchalance in rescuing fellow competitor Kevin Escoffier off the South African coast. His redress of more than 16 hours awarded for the rescue and subsequent rendezvous with the French Navy to transfer Kevin bumps him up to 4th place overall. In this extraordinary 9th edition of the race, it was enough to make anyone dance to the rhythm.
One sheet, one jammer, one roll. Being a mainsail trimmer has always been one of the key jobs, but on an AC-75 it's one of the most complex positions aboard. While the flight controller flies the boat and the helmsman steers, main trimmers have the boat's throttle at their fingertips. Handling that power is proving to be crucial and very complicated. So I sat down with just one of 4 people in the world who have hands-on AC-75 racing experience. He's an Olympic gold medalist and has 6 World Championship titles, including 3 in the foiling Moth. For the last 3 years, he's been with American Magic, and he is Paul Goodison. Now, there are a couple of things that strike me when I look down the list of your achievements. One is what I guess a lot of people will know you for is your Olympic medal in Beijing in the laser. But of course, a lot of people will also know you for 3 World Championship titles in the foiling Moth. And it does seem that there are 2 things that stand out there. One is you're good at trimming mainsails, and the other one is you're pretty handy on foils as well. And how much of a connection is there between that and these boats?
I think there's a big connection. The laser maybe not so much. That's I think more just a feel. You develop your feel a lot in those slower boats that are such tight racing, and then there's quite a big similarity with the foiling Moth, where things happen so fast and it's a lot more three-dimensional. And I think moving those onto these AC75s, which are incredible boats, like the last time round in the foiling 50s, it's a lot more 3D than it has been before with the foiling, but then moving into these boats where you can move the cant around, and the boats are just so much more complex, so much more three-dimensional and so fast that there's a lot going on a lot of the time.
It does seem like there's, I mean, we'll get on to some of the detail in a minute, but it just seems like the most incredible three-dimensional puzzle, that everything is capable of moving, and it's such a long way from a laser and a Moth. I mean, how hard was it to learn these techniques?
I think a lot of it is transferable from what you learn in the Moths and the catamarans or in any foiling boat that transfers into these. But what is so special and dynamic about these is how the cant, the arms move around, how much you can power the boats up, depower the boats, and change a lot of the leeway in the three-dimensional side by adjusting the foil cant.
Okay, so tell us a bit about your role as a main sheet trimmer. We've seen you, as indeed we've seen other main sheet trimmers at the back of the boat, generally at the back of the boat, I think, with a control box. Yeah. We've got no idea what you're doing. Talk us through what you're actually doing. What are the primary controls?
So the twin sail setup is such a complex puzzle, and like any mainsail you're trimming or you're looking at, you can see it, whereas the hard thing is with this, you don't actually see the leeward side. So we rely quite heavily on data to give us information about the sail that you can't see. So a lot of the time you spent looking at instruments that are giving you all sorts of information about the sail, about the mast, about your boat speed, about your leeway, there's 101 things, but you primarily in charge of trying to set up the sail plan to be as efficient and as fast as possible. So for my controller, for instance, I think we ended up with 18 different functions on there. I think I might struggle to name them all, but if you put it in front of me, I'd probably be able to figure it out. But just that you have two sails to control, so I guess there's two Outals, two Cunninghams. We only have one main sheet, but I know some of the other guys were playing around with differential between the main sheets. And then the mast rotation. Like, the mast is such a powerful tool about moving that around. And then of course you have the upper control, which controls the upper part of the sail, whether you twist or whether you camber, and then your main sheet, which it's a real complex bit of the puzzle, because for one to work well, the other 3 or 4 dimensions all have to line up quite well to be able to get the shape you want and to get the sail you want.
That's amazing. I mean, there's so many questions just listening to you there that I've got, but I'm trying to think of a logical way to work through them. I mean, I suppose actually one thing we should say, maybe explain a little more, is about this double skin main, and you've just raised something that I hadn't even crossed my mind, that you can't see the shape of the leeward one. I mean, that's so how much are you actually changing the shape between the two skins?
So quite a lot. Like in the end, it all becomes a way up between how much you control you want or allowed to have from the weight implications, because there's obviously a VCG and an LCG rule where you have to only allowed a certain amount of weight in certain amounts, so you can't just have a gigantic arm at the top of the sail that bends it open because it's too heavy and the VCG goes so high. So it's really difficult to get a control system that's effective and efficient enough, but also very light, so you don't change, so you make it rule compliant. So that's quite tricky.
In the rules, you're allowed to change, you're allowed control, is it 3 places up the sail?
So we basically we can do whatever we like in the top 4 meters, and then whatever you like in the bottom 2 meters. And you can have control systems or ways of changing and moving the sail dynamically. In between that, you're allowed certain things like cams and tethers, but you're not allowed to actively control the stuff in the middle. So that's more controlled by a mast rotation angle or a sheet tension thing, but you can't dynamically control that stuff.
When you say control it, that's changed the shape of the skins in the middle of the sail, the relative shape.
Yeah. So say you have a bar between going back from the mast or some form of cam that when you rotate the mast, it pushes on the battens or pulls on the battens, and you change the shape a little bit from windward to leeward, but that's fixed. In the zones, either the upper or the lower zone, you're able to pull around on strings and move bars and do all sorts of stuff to try and manipulate the sail shapes to what you think you need.
Right, I better not start asking why, because I'm sure we'll end up going down a rabbit hole. But So I mean, as an example, so if we're talking about the top of the sail,
Yep.
where you are allowed to do what you want to do, you can. Is it essentially like having a separate outhaul control for each skin at the top? So you could change the camber of each skin at the top.
Very similar. Like each team has gone about this very differently. I've got a rough idea, but I can't exactly put my finger on what all the other teams have done. But we've all have some form of control, and a lot of it is you have to balance between having the perfect aero shape for when you're straight lining in stable conditions, but also these boats are a handful to sail. So you also need to have a system that also makes it easier for you to sail the boat and to manipulate the sail shape as easy as you can. I guess, for instance, if you think about the main sheet loads on these boats are super high. So if you've got 8 guys, you have to get enough pressure to move the main sheets, it's a lot. Whereas if you have 8 guys producing enough pressure to move the top of the sail through a small range that isn't anywhere near as loaded as the main sheet, it comes a lot cheaper. So you have more energy efficient ways of sailing the boats, but maybe not always the most efficient sail shape. And then you have the fastest sail shape, but it's usually requires the biggest loads to be moved, so it's slower, but it's a real puzzle.
And I've heard about Cunningham loads that are, I think someone said 5 or 6 tons on the Cunningham. Is that right? Or is
Probably
it
higher.
Higher than that, is it really?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's presumably the Cunningham's so important as it would be on a windsurfer, I guess, or any boat.
Yeah.
In that the more you put on, the more you open up the top.
Yeah. It's a great tool to flatten the sail and to manipulate the shape of the sail. You can also tie this in with using or affecting your control systems you have in the tops or bottom to do other stuff that's linked together. So it's a massive tool, but it's, again, like you say, the loads are quite high. So the energy required to move them is also quite high.
So if there's upwards of 5 tons, maybe even 8 tons or whatever it is, what kind of loads are in the main sheet?
again, higher loads than this. Like it's incredible how much the loads have gone up from starting this boat. Like we are probably another 50% more main sheet load than when we started sailing the boat for the first time. And a lot of that comes from the speeds. You imagine when we started sailing these boats, we were just doing 30, 31 knots upwind, and everybody thought that was pretty fast, and we're going quite nicely. And then you look at the last day of racing in the wind, we were going 42 knots upwind, and you have so much more apparent wind speed over the deck to literally get the sail to sit in the same place as in when you're doing 30 knots. It requires a lot more tension.
Oh really? It's as simple, well, I'm sure it's not as simple as that,
but it is.
It's
just apparent wind speed.
Right, and so it's the load on the sail and keeping it in the right shape.
Yeah.
And keeping that leech to stand up and...
Or getting the shapes you want, yeah.
Really? Right. Okay. So the primary control's obviously main sheet, but it doesn't travel anywhere near as far. I mean, they're on hydraulic rams, aren't they, the main sheets?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's is, I guess.
Yeah.
No one's on
it's all hydraulics apart from the jib sheet. Right. So you also have control from my box of the jib car, so you can change the jib car, you can alter the jib up and down, so you have a good control over the balance of the boat. But it's so hard to, if you're straight lining, it's so easy to get everything set up perfectly. The hard bit is you come out of attack and you exit attack at 26 knots, and you need a shape to get you up to speed, and then you're doing 38 knots and you need a completely different shape. And within, I guess, a minute and a half, you have to pull the main sheet on harder, you have to pull the Cunningham on harder, you have to change both outhauls, you then move the upper control to change the twist, then you're moving the traveller up and down to affect the heel angle, you have the jib car, the jib lead up and down. Like there's almost so much going on that it's really critical that you don't get carried away and you focus on the key bits. So don't be too critical when you see the guys that maybe haven't always got the right shape. There's plenty going on.
And so you've just described a scenario. What kind of time frame are you talking about there?
Oh, you exit attack and you're at this 25, 26 knots, and within 15, 20 seconds you're probably up to pace, maybe less. You're up to the high 30s, and of course the apparent wind speed goes up so fast, so the boat's going faster, you've got more apparent wind speed, you need to flatten the sails, and flattening the sails when you're doing 26 knots is a lot easier than flattening them when you're doing 38 knots. So the loads just go up and up and up. You're trying to generate power to accelerate, and then you're trying to reduce drag. once you're up to speed, and it's knowing where in the curve you want to change from one to the other and how aggressive you do that while you also still in all the oil pressure to balance the boat. That's the hard part, and the real design and the real system side is as soon as you move one sort of control, so the main sheet that's really highly loaded, to then go to something that's lightly loaded, is making sure the pressure balances are very similar. So one thing doesn't move really fast, the other really slow, and how you develop the boat to make it easier to sail.
Do you ever get to the point where you want to do a whole load of changes and someone else wants
Every
to keep
day.
the boat flying and you get a red button that says, no, not yet, mate, wait?
Well, you look at the guys' faces and you see them busting a gut for you the whole time when you're racing, and it's more about balancing when you change one part to make it faster, but also if the boat's heeled or the boat's out of trim, you have to use the oil to balance the boat rather than change the sail. So it's an ongoing, I guess, equation you're doing in your head where you're going to spend all the energy that the guys are putting in, because it's not infinite. Yeah.
Do you have, so you talk about all these different controls that you have to use as you go through a tack. Is any of it automated? Can you have preset functions where you press a button and 5 things happen?
Oh, you can have presets, and we do have presets. The problem is you're not allowed feedback in the control, so you can't ease to a certain spot, you can't pump to a certain spot. You can basically open a valve for half a second or 1 second or 2 seconds, but you can't land it at a certain position, and that's the real hard thing, because if you want to say ease your outhaul an inch, when you're going 30 knots, the valve opens for a second and it might move that much, but when you're doing 40 knots, you open the valve for a second and it moves twice as much. So in some way you try and use the automation, and you pick your times when you want to turn that on or turn that off to help you, depending on how stable the conditions. Obviously the worst thing you can do is, if you don't have any oil, is ease things automatically. The guys have to pull it back on. So it's a balancing act.
I don't want to, you've just made me think of something, and I don't want to go off piece too far down here, but just thinking about away from the cup, and one of the criticisms, or one of the things that people often struggle with the America's Cup, not just this cycle, but any cycle, is that it's such a long way away from the kind of sailing that they do. And yet it strikes me that in these systems, and in some of the systems that you've just described, if they were to be automated for high performance cruising boats or even high performance racing boats, you could actually, we are on the verge of quite a big breakthrough where the technology is there, and we can make the decision as to whether we want to automate it and make it simple or not.
I think, I feel very privileged to be able to have sailed and raced these boats. They're absolutely incredible, and if we can somehow have that trickle down to the guy at the club who goes sailing his laser or sailing his keelboat, and give him the opportunity to feel that experience or live that experience, I think that is such an awesome potential. Obviously it costs money, and it's a long way away, but I think you've got to keep pushing the boundaries, and at some point this will all become the norm.
Well, it's not just about racing boats either, is it really? I guess. I mean, in the same way that ABS came out of Formula One, and that's on every shopping car around now.
It's definitely a lot comfier when you're flying over the waves than when you're bouncing, slamming into it. I think I spent one day in the chase boat watching, and it breaks you bouncing around in there. If you're out on the race boat, it feels much nicer.
Now, just going back to your role, so you've described some of the situations that you have to control. Feedback, that's the other thing that I struggle to get my head around. Where anybody who sails conventional boats is used to being able to feel the boat in some form, whatever they're doing. How on earth do you feel the boat through a box with all those controls?
It takes time to develop the feel. I remember, back to laser sailing or Moth sailing, I always think I sail and do better when I don't wear gloves, because I'm more in touch with the boat. So taking the actual connection away to then holding a Game Boy, it is very different, but you still have the sensation of the acceleration of the speed, whether it's through your bum on the seat or through your arm on the deck. You still feel very much at one with the boat, and you get a sense not only from the numbers but from how the boat feels, how the boat accelerates, and even with our boat, it was probably one of the loudest, but the noise it makes, you can tell when it's accelerating from the change in pitch. It's pretty cool.
It was definitely the noisiest boat, that's for sure. Yeah, no question about that. Great stuff. Paul, thank you so much.
No worries.
It's been really, really interesting. I could go on all afternoon, but I know at some point you do have to actually
I finished work in half an hour and it's my last day, so I'll be going having a couple of beers with the boys.
Oh, excellent. Oh, well, congratulations on that.
No worries. Nice.
Brilliant.
Great
Thanks so
subject.
much, Paul.
Thank you.
Cheers. In the ORC racing world, designer Matteo Poli has been on a roll. His boats have won 3 World Championships since 2015. But this is his first design for Cantieri del Pardo. The new Grand Soleil 44 has been created to be a true cruiser racer, and she's a slippery boat. Upwind at over 8 knots, downwind on a beam reach with a code 0 more than 15 knots. Impressive stuff for a cruiser racer. One of the key areas for development was in the light wind speed range, where boats of this type tend to suffer. All-round performance was also an important design criteria. The single rudder and lack of hull chines are examples of how this has been achieved. Her large, non-overlapping headsail is another, delivering power while remaining easy to manage. And when it comes to her deck layout and interior, the 44's dual role is easy to see. Double-handed racing is continuing to grow. From the new Olympic discipline for the 2024 Games to the practicality of only having to organise 2 crew, there are plenty of incentives driving this rise. UK sailmakers have put their weight behind this growing scene by creating sails specifically for the short-handed market. Durability and the ability to work over a wider wind range are 2 key factors in the design. Here they recommend their X-Drive construction, which have higher yarn densities. Using taffeta on one or both sides of the sail is another popular way of increasing the life and the performance of the sail. From a handling point of view, reefable jibs can be quicker to deploy than changing a headsail. And incorporating a zipper system to contain the slab reef section of the sail can make life easier. Hanked headsails are another popular option, particularly for those who sail offshore in breezier conditions. To find out more, head to their website. We all know the importance of kill cords on motorboats, but in the real world we also know that it's not always easy to stay connected when you need to, and that the worst can happen when you least expect it. The Guardian wireless kill switch from Exposure OLAS offers an ingenious solution. Worn on your wrist, the watch-sized transmitter maintains a wireless link which instantly cuts the engine if you go overboard. Here's how it works.
Once the Guardian's installed, it's really easy to operate. Simply switch on the power to your boat. If your tag's not already connected, you'll hear it beeping and you'll see it flashing on the switch here. So you switch on your tag, then it simply connects immediately, and then you're good to go. You can connect up to 15 OLAS transmitters, so you can cover your crew, your family, your pets, and even the OLAS float-on attaches up. Now we've got the Guardian going, I'm just going to do a quick test to make sure it cuts out after 2 seconds. And then you hear the alarm going off on the phone and the alarm from the Guardian. And you're good to go and start boating again. Switch your engine back on.
It is no secret that gunboats have helped to shape a new generation of modern cruiser racer cats, and the Gunboat 68 is a good example. But success is not just about looks. Composite material supplier Hexcel have played a big part in raising the bar. From military to commercial and industrial applications, they cover a wide range of the composites world. This meant that Gunboat were able to order dry carbon rolls at exact weights and cut to precise widths, which ensured a tight control on weight and efficiency during the build. The fabrics also need to be infusion friendly. Here, the careful arrangement of the gauge and pattern of the stitching eases the flow of resin during the infusion process. For Gunboat, this process avoids the cost and complications of a large oven and heat-resistant moulds, benefits which feed directly through to the customer and have made a big contribution to setting a new standard in the cruising cat world. Now, just in case you've lost track as to where we are on the road to the America's Cup, here's a short rundown on the first 2 days of the Prada Cup Final. And if you want to know what happened in the semi-final, click on the link above. The supporters were excited on the opening day of the Prada Cup Final, but you could feel the tension. Light winds were due to build, but by how much and when? And which team would it favour? The first clue came in the pre-start as Ineos dropped off her foils and stopped. Luna Rossa almost followed suit, but managed to keep their pace, just, and managed to cross the line at speed and on time. But the British were stuck, struggling to get underway. The gap between the two was opening already, and quickly. By gate 1, Luna Rossa were 1 minute 20 seconds ahead. On the second lap they'd increased to 1 minute 54. The race was going one way, to the Italians. And after 23 minutes of racing, Luna Rossa had taken the first win of the Prada Cup Final.
We are very happy, obviously. One is done. And yeah, the next one will be a very different race, I think. The wind is increasing. And it's not just about staying on the foils, but it will be a different race for sure.
One boat could get off the foil and one couldn't, and that was the story. But yeah, it is what it is. We just got to do the best we can in the conditions and keep pushing.
For race 2, the breeze had built significantly. A different race was in store.
This is the race committee. The wind sampling period is complete and this race is live.
A closely matched start at speed was the proof. Luna Rossa couldn't live to windward of Ineos and were forced to tack off. Advantage Ineos. But it didn't last long. The British were forced to dip, and the Italians pulled out enough to pass the first gate in the lead. By gate 2 they'd squeezed a little more to lead by 17 seconds. Sure-footed and confident, a steady performance in the steady breeze. This was their day, and the next 2 laps proved it. And Luna Rossa took their second win of the day.
Yeah, it was a good day. I thought the boys sailed really well on board. Still obviously a few things I think we need to sharpen up on, but great job by the team. Boat was performing very, very well.
A punchy start to the Prada Cup Final. Day 2, the forecast was for more breeze, and shifty too. Conditions that Ineos Team UK had previously excelled in. But confidence was high in the Italian camp. They were 2-0 ahead, and their supporters fully behind them. Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli were looking tougher by the day. In the pre-start, the pair looked set to engage. Skipper Ben Ainsley certainly wanted to, but got greedy trying to get the Italians under control, and lost the advantage to Luna Rossa, who then had the upper hand in the early stages of the race. By the first gate, the Italians had kept the British under control, but the margin was small, just 9 seconds. And while the British did all they could to pile on the pressure, the racing was close, the boat handling impressive, but there was never a lead change. The Italians stayed cool, calm and collected, winning by 13 seconds.
We can see how the English are not easy to beat. Even with a bad start that they had, they were very close and they wouldn't give up. So it's impressive how they're holding, and we have to keep thinking about the next race.
Yeah, we made a mess at the start. We just got a bit greedy going for the hook. Thought it was on for a split second, and you know, for these match race starts, it go from hero to zero pretty quick. Free roll.
In the second race of the day, Ineos continued to push hard, but tripped up. It nearly cost them dearly. Once again, Luna Rossa had the upper hand from the start and controlled Ineos all the way up the first leg. The distance, just 12 seconds at the first gate. In the face of intense pressure, Luna Rossa were continuing to excel, picking the best side of the course while controlling their opponents. Ineos were trying all they could, but couldn't make any impression on the Italians, who crossed the line 41 seconds ahead to take their 4th win in a row. Another dominant performance.
Ready? 3 to go.
Not too many high fives, boys.
Nice and cool, boys. Today's racing was all about getting off the line in front, which we did a great job of. The boys and the handles did a outstanding job, you know, just tack for tack, and we were just gaining every time. So very happy with the lads on the handles today.
Oh, yeah, tough day. We're not happy with it. You know, we can sail a hell of a lot better than that, than we need to. And yeah, we just gave 2 races to those guys, you know, bad, you know, off the start line. And to their credit, they sailed really well and didn't give us really a chance to get back into it. But at this level, you can't afford to make any mistakes, and we made too many. So we've got to go away and regroup and really get our act together for Wednesday and come out swinging.
Although they were now 4-0 up, the Italian team knew it was still too early for celebrations. So once again, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Please do keep spreading the word. Make sure you subscribe, check out our Facebook page. Plus, if watching isn't enough, make sure you check out our brand new webpage where you can read all about what's going on down here, plus my take on the racing. In the meantime, stay well, stay safe. Until next time.